All right, what did you learn from your first job? So my first proper job was selling the old afternoon Herald at Camberwell Junction. It's a job that wouldn't exist anymore, partly because we don't have an afternoon Herald anymore, but also they wouldn't let 11 and 12-year-old boys walk up and down cars waiting at the traffic lights trying to sell papers into the window. The big thing I learnt was when the paper was 15 cents, as it was back then, this is in around about 1979, most people would give you 20 cents and say, keep the change. It wasn't worth, getting a 5-cent piece. So we actually did really well, made a lot of tips. When I say a lot, it was a few dollars a week, but back then that was quite a lot of money for an 11-year-old. The problem was when they put the price of the paper up to 20 cents, no one fished out an extra 5-cent coin. And our tips went from 5 cents a paper to no cents a paper very quickly. So the rounding errors were important. Our next guest is a career coach, Sue Ellson. Good morning.
Hi, Tom.
Well, our Premier-to-be, or will he be, because it's looking rather uncertain in the Labor Party at the moment, but let's just assume he is. He said his first job was age 14 working at the Kmart in Airport West. He said it was tough for a 14-year-old, especially at Christmas time, but it taught him the value of hard work. As I mentioned, I used to sell the afternoon Herald to drivers waiting at the traffic lights, and you'd have to get off the road when the traffic lights went green. When the paper was 15 cents, we made a lot of tips because people would give you 20 and say, keep the change. When they put the price up to 20, we got no tips whatsoever. So it wasn't so lucrative.
And you wouldn't get tips in Kmart either.
No. Well, tipping's not a big thing. But, I mean, your first job, it's never going to be the most brilliant job in the world, but I guess you do suddenly learn the value of a dollar, don't you?
You definitely do, and you have to budget, and all of a sudden you're working with other adults, not your parents or teachers. You're making new friends. If you're lucky, you'll have a really fantastic mentor, and you might decide, well, there's a better way to do things. And I met a young person who started a new job recently, rocked up on the first day, just finished their training in cybersecurity and said, they haven't been doing this. And thought he was pretty smart. And then the following week made a mistake and ran home to Dad and said, what do I do? So, there's a lot of things that our parents suddenly become useful for when you start work too.
Yeah, well, there's some other things. I know my daughter has a part-time job and the concept of taxation suddenly looms large in her life. She goes, I earn, $17 an hour or something, but, the federal government takes quite a lot of that. And I said, yes. Yep. And as you get older, that only gets worse.
Yes, and it can be very tempting to do the math and say, I'd be better off on student benefits rather than a job. But you gain so much more from a job than just the cash. So I wouldn't recommend that. It's always better to be out in circulation and earning a living and learning new skills. I definitely wouldn't do just the math.
I think another thing I always learned was to be punctual, like turn up on time and ideally turn up 5 or 10 minutes early. And in our industry, punctuality is hugely important because, shows have to start at certain times and people have to be prepared for them. You just can't not do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I remember when I started my career, I'd get up late and be running to the train station with wet hair. And I think about it now, I would never turn up to work with wet hair, but I certainly did back in the day. So, yeah, you do learn to get much better at that over time.
Another thing I was told by my parents was to not talk to the elders unless they spoke to me and to listen to what they say and not proffer my opinion. Now, I don't know, these days young people start work here and they seem to have instant opinions on everything and are prepared to share them with people who have vastly more experience. Is that sort of idea that, one should be seen and not heard, has that changed a bit now?
I definitely say so. They're much more empowered and they'll chip you on if you say something that was slightly inappropriate to suggest or it might be racist or sexist or like I was out with a young person very recently and I said, that girl offered great service. And the person said, I don't think it was a girl.
Oh, oh gosh.
I thought, okay, that person.
Yes.
I quickly corrected myself. So, yes, they certainly do have the power to speak up. And I remember having to call them Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. or whatever rather than by their first name. So a lot of things have changed, but I think we can learn a lot by having that intergenerational workplace. So
Yes.
if there's a level of respect with everyone, your lived experience, can be helpful and their new ideas can be helpful. So, yes, if you can keep that communication open and not be fighting over striped paint and left-handed screwdrivers, then, life can be very productive at work.
I think the final thing that young people learn and maybe need to learn is to let their mobile phones go for a while. Like if you're working in a shop, for example, you can't sit there staring at your phone. You've got to be on the lookout for customers and folding clothes and whatever. And having to spend 6 or 8 hours without looking at your phone too much is quite difficult for them.
Yes, because they're so accustomed to it, and now they've also got their watches, so there's also that element. But I also know a young person who started off in retail, and it was in a different chain to Kmart, and they found that they didn't have the support of their manager either. And so what would happen is some customer would come in and complain and request a refund, and the manager would always just bail, and then that behaviour was perpetuated. So I think there's a lot to learn from both sides, because this young person said, look, you should say no to this person. They're clearly lying. The goods have been used. They don't have the receipt, et cetera, et cetera. But if people complained enough, they'd get away with it. So, there's still lots of things that need a little bit of ironing out in the workplace. But the Fair Work Ombudsman has some really great resources for people who are starting work. So I definitely recommend that people check those out. There's a video, and it provides some of that information on, what is acceptable when you start work. And I think those sorts of resources can be really helpful for people too.
Right, thank you, Sue. Sue Ellson there, career coach. I